When you think about the Middle Ages, sometimes, if not most, think about the European Middle Ages ranging from the 13th century to the mid-17th century before the Age of Enlightenment and then eventually towards the Industrial Revolution. But I think it's time we look over throughout all of the Middle Ages. Hi, my name is Jessa, and please join me as we look together at our top 10 disturbing moments from the Middle Ages you wish you could forget. Oh, and before we begin, in the last video I was in, the top 10 messed up things you never knew about the Salem witch trials, I gave you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, what gets broken without being held? The answer is, drumroll please, a promise. Dang. The next riddle will be at the end of this video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10, the Cavender Synod. Whatever you choose to do in this life is up to you, and once you pass away, you pass away. And the dead should rest where they lie, right? Well, not in this case. Between the 9th and the 10th century, the papacy during the peak of the Christianity era was in its most opposing. When Pope Stephen VI had the body of his predecessor, Pope Formus, plucked from his grave and placed him on trial, it was noted as one of the strangest and ludicrous trials to date. The reason? He accused Formus of perjury and having assumed position to the papacy illegally and illegally presiding more than one diocese or a group of churches that a bishop supervises at the same time. So if you can imagine for a second a man just yelling at a rotting corpse for as long as he could, waiting for a response, and then concluding that the corpse was guilty because he, the guy, just couldn't speak back. Formus was then pronounced guilty and his papacy was annulled. He was then punished by having his clothes stripped, 3 of his fingers chopped off, and the rest of his body thrown into the Tiber River. The Roman people were so enraged by the acts of the Pope Stephen VI that they had him removed from office, thrown in jail, and then he himself was then strangled to death. Deprived of the papal insignia, his party found another leader in the murderous Pope Sergius III, where 12 years of blood, intrigue, and terror would follow. Pope Sergius III helped the corpse trial of Pope Formius and considered all the other popes like Pope John, Pope Benedict IV, Leo, and Christopher all as anti-popes. The reason being is because all of these popes mentioned that they did not approve of Pope Sergius' decisions on the Cavender Synod, and the level of corruption that was left at an all-time high. What are you, some kind of animal? Well, if you were in the court in medieval times, yes. Believe it or not, even if you are a 4-legged creature or have feathers, you too can go to jail. There were records of at least 85 animal trials that took place during the Middle Ages, and the tales from the very tragic to absurd. The most serial crimes took place with pigs, as they were accused and convicted of chewing body parts, eating young people. Most were found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging or even burnt at the stake. Even in 1386, one pig was dressed up in a waistcoat, gloves, drawers, and a human mask for his execution. I guess it helped aid with the guilt of the fact that they're convicting a pig? I don't know. Of course, as I mentioned, it wasn't just pigs. Even in 1474, a rooster was found guilty for an unnatural crime of laying an egg. Probably a chicken. My god. Anyways, even rats were finding themselves guilty and got a strong-worded letter to leave the premises. Yeah, because rats can read. And in 1596 France, there was a trial for dolphins. I don't know how they did this. I wish they had a court sketch at the time. I really want to know. Number 8, Bal d'Ardens. Ball of the Burning Men. If you're a big fan of Bridgerton, they had a ball set up by Netflix at the candlelight event throughout the US and Canada. Not sure if they did it anywhere else, but I'm pretty sure in the UK they also hold their own festivities of modern balls and parties. But at this particular party, I guess at first it seemed fun, but then it just burst into flames. But it was definitely a legendary ride as its stories fled through the course of time. The Bal d'Ardens, or the Ball of Burning Men, was an event that took place in 1393 when the wife of Charles VI held a ball in honor of her lady-in-waiting's remarriage. At the ball, King Charles and 4 other noblemen were all dressed up as wild men for some reason, and they danced the dance crew level choreography. But then the king's brother Louis of Valois arrived pretty late and he was very drunk. For some reason he was carrying a torch into the room, even though there was a clear no bring your own torch policy at the party, and accidentally lit one of the dancers on fire, causing a domino effect of lighting everyone else on fire as their costumes were dressed in very flammable material and very dry fabric. The king himself was saved by a young lady who threw her dress over him, while other dancers escaped by trying to jump into a vat of wine. One attendee noted, the 4 men were burnt alive, their body parts flayed into the floor, and streams of blood were everywhere, while other nobles were severely injured trying to rescue them, but the news of the event spread like wildfire. And the tragedy was heard throughout the citizens of Paris. The people were basically saying like, that's what they get for being rich jerks. Number 7, King Henry VIII's body count. No, I'm not talking about that body count, you know, like, which is the obvious of his outrageous relationships and the conquest for a male heir. Even throughout his rule, he has still kept this ruthless behavior as King Henry VIII ordered the death of roughly 72,000 of the English people throughout the capital punishment through his 38-year reign, many of whom were either members of the clergy or ordinary citizens and nobles who had taken part of the uprisings and protests up and down the country. Victims of the king's reigns were either executed by him or killed in his name. The category of the penalties were placed into 3 sanctions: heresy, treason, and the denial of his royal supremacy as the head of the English church. Of course, this this is due to the fact of his other body count. Having to remarry multiple times was considered a big no to the Vatican, as the king could not have a queen if his previous was currently living. But in the instance of Catherine, his first wife, she was too old to bear any more kids, which is why he remarried Anne Boleyn. It was reasonable enough for him to break off from the church and make his own. Of course, the people loyal to the church did not approve of this, and they had heavy criticism of the king's decision, as he would constantly remarry, behead, and then remarry every woman who came along claiming that they could birth him a son. Although scholars believe it was roughly 52,000 to 72,000 people, still he could have had executed during his entire reign. Either way, his bloodthirsty rampage, he was able to give England one of the greatest rulers of their time, Queen Elizabeth I. Number 6. A bucket. I don't know how to explain this one necessarily, but in the 1300s around Bologna, Italy, some random guys from Modena stole a bucket off a wall. For some reason, it pissed off a lot of Bolognese people, and so they decided to start a battle over a bucket. But contrary to popular belief, it wasn't a bucket at all, but a trophy taken by the Modenese after the war. And then another war was declared because Modena had captured Bolognese castle. Although it would have been pretty amusing if it was a bucket, but in defense of the Bolognese people, I think the guy from Modena said that. Still, Bologna mustered an army of 32,000 men and marched again against Modena in November, and 7,000 Modenese met them on Bolognese territory. Around 2,000 casualties from both ends, and apparently in other suspected sources, the bucket, if it was a bucket, at this point I'm not even sure, a Modenese took a bucket from a well just outside the city gate as a trophy, and since at this point the Bolognese had fled and rooted into the walls of their city. Number 5. Empress Wu. In China, around the early Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, lived and ruled the Tang dynasty, an imperial dynasty that rules from 618 to 907 and a rule between 690 and 705 with Empress Wu, who had seized the throne. Generally a golden age of Chinese culture, it was funded by the Li family, who seized power during the decline of the former dynasty. But who was Empress Wu? Empress Wu's rise to power was achieved through cruel and calculating tax. A popular conspiracy theory stated that she killed her own baby girl and blamed it on another empress so that the empress would be demoted. She was so driven with power that even with her eldest son to the crown prince began to assert his authority and advocating policies, he suddenly died in 675. And many suspected he was poisoned by, well, his own mother. The next heir kept a low profile, or tried to, but then Empress Wu accused him of plotting a rebellion and was later on banished. Eventually, a palace coup took place and forced Empress Wu to yield her power and her position, and so the next day, her son Zhongzong was restored to power and the Tang dynasty was formally restored. Still, considering the golden era, the Tang dynasty thrived as a high point in Chinese civilization and a golden age of cosmopolitan culture. With the land trades along the Silk Road, maritime trades by sea, the Tang was able to acquire and gain many technologies, cultural practices, and rare luxury items. And it was all thanks to the decision of getting rid of one power-obsessed empress. Number 4. The Bubonic Plague and the Cat War. Traveling back to the UK for this, let's look over the Bubonic Plague, a disease that reigned rampant between the years of 1347 and 1350. The plague was considered of the biggest killers of the Middle Ages, as it has devastating effects on the population of Europe throughout these centuries. Caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis, it was caused by an infected flea that would often be found in rats. Because of the inhabitable conditions of lack of hygiene and constrained towns that grew in population, the plague had easily spread, infecting and killing over 75 to 200 million people throughout all of Europe. If you were infected with the Bubonic Plague, you had about 70 to 80% chance of dying within the next week. In England, it was out of 100 people, and roughly it would be 35 to 40 people could be expected to die from the plague. Because of the plague, life expectancy at this time was just under 20 years old. But how did this even happen? And how did we get so many rats? And how did we get so many people dying from this rampant disease? Well, between 1227 to 1241, roughly 100 years prior, Pope Gregory IX declared a war on cats. Pope Gregory truly believed that cats were tiny little satans running around because some guy was telling him during a confession that he swore he saw some guy transform into a cat. And so there was this mass extermination of cats by those loyal to the church and the Pope. Because of this, the epidemic of the bubonic plague came in with aggression, and since cats were even known to eat infected rats, the rate of disease spread like wildfire. As the populations of cats decreased, the rats increased, and so those living in the 13th century, some actually interpreted the plague as Satan is so pissed at us for killing at his cats, that's why we got the plague. Number 3. One pope, two pope, three pope. We all can't have more than one pope. According to the Catholic Church in the 14th century, when a bunch of cardinals walked into Rome to elect a new pope, but this was a French pope, and the angry mob declared that they will kill all of them if they didn't elect an Italian pope. So they elected an Italian pope, returned back to France, and then elected a French pope to be the new pope. Now there were two popes at the same time, both of them which were saying the other one was a phony, splitting up Europe into two religious groups. Of course, this was enough discourse for war, so each were ready to use the religion as their excuse to destroy the other. The Catholic Church's solution was to elect another pope, but no one knew who this pope was, and so they were all hung up over the other two popes. So now there were three popes, all of them that they were saying the other one was illegitimate and all of their other followers were going to hell. Great! Finally, the Catholic Church got rid of all the popes and elected a new one, and this time, they made sure there was no angry mobs this time. Number 2. One-day marriage. Not sure if this one counts as one of the shortest marriages on record, although apparently according to Google, the shortest marriage does go to a Kuwaiti couple that was only married for 3 minutes. With that story, apparently the bride just tripped over some stairs and she just didn't want to get married anymore. But for the daughter of King Valdemar of Denmark and Sophia of Minsk, Ingeborg was told to marry King Philip II of France in August 1193. A beautiful and sought-out wedding that I'm pretty sure took ages to plan. Like all weddings, just to be cancelled by the next day of the King Philip II because simply he just changed his mind. Attempted to send Ingeborg back to Denmark, she was outraged and went to a convent and protested to Pope Celestine III. 3 months after the wedding, Philip summoned a council to make a fake marriage tree saying Ingeborg was related to his first wife, considering according to their law, you couldn't marry someone who was related to an ancestor within 7 generations. If only the Habsburgs of Spain followed that rule, they wouldn't have so many genetic issues. Anyways, Ingeborg protested again since the so-called council avoided the marriage, and so they were sent to meet with the Pope. The Pope said nope, and this is your wife, and that marriage certificate was fake. Philip ignored the Pope's verdict, and somehow Ingeborg would spend the next 20 years in virtual imprisonment in various French castles, which to be honest, if he wanted to, he would, right ladies? And in this case instance, I wish Ingeborg knew her worth and just left him because he tried so many attempts to get rid of her. Even at one point saying the reason why they couldn't consummate the marriage the night of the wedding was because she tried witchcraft to prevent him, which obviously didn't work. The Pope was more on Ingeborg's side, and eventually a bunch of scandals like Philip remarrying while she was still locked in a tower, that marriage ended up being nulled despite having 2 kids. Ingeborg being locked in another tower again, eventually after many rounds of the church and the Pope telling Philip to quit being a pain in their rear ends, to just stick with the wife you got. It wasn't until 1213 did he finally reconcile with her, not because he wanted to, but because of the claims for the throne. He told his sons on his deathbed that in 1223 to treat Ingeborg well. And they did. They actually acknowledged her as a legit queen, and after that, she just spent her time near an island. She survived her husband after 14 years and lived her life in peace without his drama. Number 1. Nedhart Single. Who knew that even in the early 13th century that if you get a hit single, you're still gonna get music critics telling you that it was too dirty and raunchy. Compared to our modern pop singers, they might have not have been the same suave decorum as Nedhart, von Retunal, or just Sir Nedhart as his stage name to his fans in the 13th century Germany. It was around 1210 when he started composing his own jams, and Europe was just absolutely on board with the romances of Charenton de Troyes, Guinevere, Lancelot, the Knights of Shining Armor. A lot of fans were into the whole dramatic unrequited love thing because, many of thy fair maidens could only get married through political or family obligations. That came Nedhart, who took everyone's favorite themes and then twisted them. Instead, he wrote bops about the down and dirty passions of everyday people, if you catch my drift. With around 1,500 documented strophes of his songs surviving, yes you can if you wanted to check out his music today. Again, I don't know if he gets ad revenue from Spotify, but that would be very interesting to say the least. But one of his most popular songs was called Minnesanger, which to be honest, the development of making music in melodic forms with musical notations must have been pretty difficult to interpret. But still, researchers were able to figure the contour of the melody even if the rhythm of the song was hard to fathom. If anything, most of Nedhart's songs were objective satire, and he would break them up between the summer and the winter, meaning you can have your hot girl summer jams and your cuffing season slow songs. Being so famous, Nedhart even had people trying to copy him like most modern celebrities, but you can't do it like the OG. What was your favorite on the list? Did you learn anything interesting today? Let me know. Oh, right, your next riddle. Are you ready? What is the longest word in the dictionary? Be sure to put your answer in the comment below, and I'll reveal the answer in the next video of the top 10 most powerful families in history you never knew. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one. Bye bye!